Sign it, or by tomorrow your daughter won't have a home. The words didn't echo. They settled, heavy and deliberate, like something already decided. Victoria Hale didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Power, real power, never shouted. It arrived in silence, in tailored lines, in the soft click of heels against concrete that hadn't seen polish in years. The old garage smelled faintly of oil and rust, the kind that lingered in the air and clung to memory. Ethan Cole stood across from her, grease-stained hands resting lightly on the edge of a worn workbench, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow, Victoria continued, sliding the folder forward with 2 fingers, precise, controlled. $47,000. Or this property transfers to Hale Industries. A beat. No reaction. Behind him, a small pair of sneakers shifted on the cracked floor. Lily watched from the doorway, clutching the sleeve of her oversized hoodie, her wide eyes moving between the woman in black and the man who never seemed to panic, even when everything else did. "Daddy," she whispered, barely audible, but enough to cut through the tension. Ethan didn't look back. Not yet. He kept his gaze on Victoria, calm, almost too calm. "You drove all the way out here for this?" he asked quietly. No anger. No pleading. Just a question that seemed to carry something deeper beneath it. Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying him like a case file that didn't quite add up. "I don't send people for things that matter," she said. "I handle them myself." Outside, a pickup truck passed slowly on the 2-lane road, its tires crunching over gravel, the sound fading into the distance. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering once, as if even they weren't sure they wanted to witness what came next. Ethan reached for the folder but didn't open it. His fingers rested on the edge, rough, steady, unmoving. "You ever been back?" he asked. Victoria's brow tightened just slightly. "Back where?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, not awkward but intentional, like space being made for something neither of them had named yet. Lily took a small step forward, her voice soft but clear. "Are you taking our house?" Victoria's eyes flicked toward her for the first time. Just a glance. Just a second. But something shifted, small, almost imperceptible. "I'm here to settle a debt," she said, her tone even, measured, untouched. Ethan finally looked back at his daughter, his expression softening just enough to remind the room that beneath the quiet, there was something unshakable holding everything together. "Go inside, Lil," he said gently. She hesitated, then nodded, then disappeared behind the thin door that led to the back room where life was simpler, smaller, and safer. When the door clicked shut, the air changed. Victoria straightened slightly, reclaiming the moment. "You don't seem surprised," she said. Ethan exhaled slowly, almost like he had been expecting this exact scene, this exact conversation down to the last word. "No," he replied. A pause. Then softer, quieter, almost to himself. "Just thought it'd come from someone else." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Not in anger. In curiosity. And somewhere beneath the polished surface of control, something began to crack. Not loudly, not visibly, but enough to let a question in that she hadn't planned to ask. Because this wasn't how these meetings usually went. This wasn't fear. This wasn't desperation. This was something else. Something steady. Something that didn't match the story she'd been told. And for the first time since she stepped into that garage, Victoria Hale wasn't entirely sure she understood the man standing in front of her. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now, let's go on. Victoria did not move right away, and that was unusual for her because she was a woman who moved decisions forward, not someone who lingered in uncertainty. Yet something about Ethan Cole standing there with quiet control unsettled the rhythm she trusted, so she stepped closer instead, her heels making a softer sound now against the concrete as if even the space demanded a different kind of respect. "You thought it would come from someone else," she repeated, her voice still calm but no longer distant. "Explain that." Ethan glanced down at the folder in his hands, then set it gently on the workbench without opening it, as though the numbers inside held no urgency compared to something unspoken. "Most people send letters," he said, his tone even, "or lawyers or threats that sound bigger than they are." He looked back at her, steady, unflinching. "You showed up yourself," Victoria folded her arms slowly, not defensive, just composed. Because this is not just a number on paper, she replied. This property has history tied to it, and history matters when it affects my company. Ethan gave the faintest nod, like he understood more than he was saying, and for a moment the fluorescent light flickered again, casting a brief shadow across his face that made him look older than he was. Yeah, he said quietly, history matters. The garage fell into a stillness that felt heavier now, like something beneath the surface was beginning to rise. Outside, a breeze pushed dust along the roadside and rattled the loose metal sign hanging above the garage door. A dull clank that echoed once and then disappeared. Victoria's gaze shifted briefly toward the back room where Lily had gone, then returned to Ethan. You have a child, she said, not as a question but as an observation. Ethan nodded once. She is 8, he answered. She likes drawing more than talking, and she thinks this place is bigger than it really is. Victoria's expression softened for a fraction of a second before returning to its usual composure. And yet you are willing to risk losing it, she said, her tone sharpening just slightly. Ethan shook his head, not in denial but in quiet correction. No, he replied. I just do not measure everything the same way you do. That landed differently than anything else he had said, not confrontational, not defensive, just true. Victoria took a slow breath, her fingers tightening slightly against her sleeve. $47,000 is not a philosophy, she said. It is a debt. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then reached into a drawer beneath the workbench and pulled out a small, worn envelope, its edges softened by time. He did not hand it to her yet. He simply held it. You are right, he said. It is a debt. A pause, then softer. Just not the one you think. Victoria's eyes narrowed, curiosity now stronger than certainty. What is that supposed to mean? She asked. The room seemed to quiet even further, as if listening. Ethan placed the envelope on top of the folder, aligning it carefully, deliberately. You said history matters, he continued. So before you take this place, you might want to understand the part of it that never made it into your reports. Victoria hesitated just for a second, then reached forward and touched the envelope, not opening it yet, just feeling its weight, light but somehow significant. And in that moment something shifted again, subtle but undeniable, because for the first time since she arrived, Victoria Hale was not leading the conversation anymore, she was following it. Victoria turned the envelope over in her hand, her thumb brushing against its worn edge as if trying to read its history without opening it. You are asking me to reconsider a legal agreement based on sentiment, she said, her voice controlled but no longer untouched. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he replied. I am asking you to understand what you are about to erase. A silence followed, not empty but filled with something pressing just beneath the surface. Victoria exhaled slowly and finally opened the envelope, the paper inside sliding out with a faint whisper, old, slightly creased, a receipt and a handwritten note. She scanned the first line, her eyes narrowing, then slowing, then stopping entirely. This is dated 12 years ago, she said, her tone shifting. Ethan nodded once. Back when this place was not much more than a roof and a promise, he said. Victoria continued reading, her posture straight but her focus deepening with each word. The note was simple, no signature, just a line written in steady ink. If this keeps the lights on, that is enough. She looked up, confusion breaking through her composure. This payment, she said, tapping the paper lightly. It covered a default on a small manufacturing loan tied to Hale Innovations. Ethan did not answer immediately, instead he leaned back slightly against the bench, his hands relaxed at his sides. It kept a lot of things from collapsing, he said quietly. Victoria's gaze sharpened. This loan was flagged as an anonymous recovery, she said. No record of who made the payment, no traceable account, just resolved. She paused, her voice lowering. Are you telling me this was you? Ethan met her eyes, calm, steady. I am telling you I had a choice, he said. Keep what little I had or help something that looked like it might matter more. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead again, filling the silence that followed. Outside the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the metal door with a soft, restless sound. Victoria looked back at the paper, then at Ethan, something shifting behind her eyes, not disbelief but recalculation. You expect me to believe that you paid off a corporate debt for a company you had no connection to, she said. Ethan gave a small, almost invisible shrug. I did not know it was a company, he replied. I knew it was people trying not to lose everything. That landed heavier than anything else. Victoria's grip on the paper tightened just slightly, her polished certainty beginning to fracture at the edges. Why would you do that? she asked, the question quieter now, more human than strategic. Ethan looked toward the back room for a brief second, then back at her. Because someone once did the same for me, he said, simple, direct, unembellished. The room held that truth for a moment, letting it settle. Victoria swallowed, almost imperceptibly, her eyes drifting again to the note, then to the space around her, the worn tools, the faded walls, the life built piece by piece without recognition. This amount, she said slowly, adjusted over time with interest, it would be far more than what you owe now. Ethan nodded. Probably, he said. But I never kept track. Another pause, longer this time, heavier. Victoria lowered the paper slightly, her voice no longer carrying the same authority it had when she walked in. Why did you never come forward? She asked. Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. Because it was never a transaction, he said. Quietly. It was just the right thing to do. The words did not echo, they settled, deep and undeniable. And for the first time since stepping into that garage, Victoria Hale felt the ground of her certainty shift beneath her. Not violently, not dramatically, but enough to make her question whether the debt she came to collect was ever what she thought it was. Victoria did not speak right away, and that silence was no longer strategic, it was unfamiliar, like standing in a room where the rules had quietly changed without permission. She lowered the paper fully now, her gaze drifting across the garage again, but seeing it differently, not as an asset, not as a liability, but as something lived in, something earned. You gave up everything you had back then, she said finally, her voice softer, more measured. Ethan shook his head gently. No, he replied. I gave what I could afford to lose. A brief pause, then he added. Turns out it was more than I thought. The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips, not proud, not regretful, just honest. Victoria stepped back slightly, creating space between them as if she needed distance to think clearly, her fingers still holding the paper but no longer gripping it. Do you even realize what that decision became? She asked. Ethan glanced at her, calm as ever. Something that worked out. He said simply. Victoria let out a quiet breath, almost a short laugh but without humor. Worked out, she repeated. That payment kept a division alive that later became the foundation of everything Hale Industries is now. She looked at him more directly, her eyes sharper, searching. You did not just help people, you helped build an entire company. Ethan did not react the way most would, no surprise, no pride, just a quiet acceptance. Then I am glad it mattered, he said, and that was it. No claim, no expectation, just a statement that settled in the space between them. Outside the wind slowed, leaving the air still again, the kind of stillness that made every small sound feel louder, the hum of the lights, the distant creak of the old roof. Victoria looked down at the contract on the workbench, the clean lines of legal language. Suddenly feeling disconnected from what she now knew. And now that same company is here to take the only thing you have left, she said, not accusing, not defensive, just stating the contradiction. Ethan followed her gaze to the folder, then back to her. That is how systems work, he replied. They do not remember why something exists, only what it is worth. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. That landed deeper than she expected. I remember, she said, almost instinctively, then stopped as if realizing something mid-thought. Ethan watched her, not pressing, not questioning, just present. She looked down at the paper again, then slowly folded it once, carefully, like it deserved more respect than before. 12 years ago, she said, quieter now. I was not the one making decisions yet. A pause, her eyes distant for a moment. But I remember the night everything almost fell apart. The board was ready to shut that division down. Investors pulling out. No one willing to take the risk? She looked up at him again, something different in her expression now, something more human. Then suddenly the numbers changed, the loss disappeared, and everything stabilized overnight. She swallowed, the memory clearly sharper than she expected. They called it a miracle. Ethan did not interrupt, he let her continue. I built my entire career on what came after that moment, she said, her voice steady but no longer cold. Every decision, every expansion, every success traces back to that single turning point. She looked at him, really looked this time, as if seeing him not as a debtor but as something far more complicated. And you are telling me that miracle was you? The question hung there, heavy but quiet. Ethan did not hesitate. No, he said, shaking his head slightly. I am telling you it was a choice, a beat, then softer, one anyone could have made. Victoria stared at him, searching for something that would make that statement smaller, less significant, but there was nothing there except truth, unadorned and steady. And in that moment, something inside her shifted again, deeper this time, because the man standing in front of her was not asking for recognition, not asking for repayment, not even asking for fairness, and that made everything she came here to do feel suddenly, undeniably incomplete. Victoria remained still, the folded paper resting lightly in her hand as if it carried more weight than any contract she had ever signed, her eyes lingering on Ethan, not with authority now but with something quieter, something searching. "You made a choice," she said slowly, almost testing the words as they left her. Ethan nodded once. "Yes," he replied, simple and grounded. Victoria took a step back and looked around the garage again. But this time the worn walls and aging tools no longer felt like evidence of failure, they felt like proof of endurance. "And now you are about to lose all of this because of another choice," she said, her voice softer. Ethan followed her gaze, then rested his hands on the edge of the workbench again, steady as ever. "That is how life balances things sometimes," he said. Victoria shook her head slightly, a quiet resistance forming in her expression. "No," she said, "that is how systems ignore context." A brief silence followed, heavier now, more personal. From the back room the faint sound of movement could be heard, a drawer closing, a small step across wooden flooring. Then the door creaked open just enough for Lily to peek through, her small face cautious but curious. "Daddy," she said softly, "is she still here?" Ethan turned his head slightly, his voice gentle. "Yes, sweetheart," he answered. "It is okay." Lily hesitated, then stepped out slowly, holding a piece of paper in her hand, her eyes flicking toward Victoria before settling on her father. "I finished it," she said, extending the drawing toward him. Ethan took it carefully, like it mattered more than anything else in the room. He looked down at it and a quiet warmth touched his expression. "That is beautiful," he said. Victoria watched the exchange without speaking, something in her posture softening further. Lily glanced at her again, this time holding her gaze for a second longer. "Are you taking our garage?" she asked, her voice small but steady. The question landed differently than before, not as an interruption but as a truth. Spoken without filters. Victoria did not answer immediately. She looked at Ethan, then back at Lily, her composure still there but no longer untouched. "I came here to settle something," she said carefully, choosing each word. Lily tilted her head slightly, as if that answer did not quite reach her. "It is where Daddy fixes things," she said. "And sometimes people do not have money but he helps them anyway." Ethan did not interrupt. He simply stood there, letting the moment unfold. Victoria's eyes shifted back to him, then to the drawing still in his hand. "Can I see it?" she asked, the question quieter than anything she had said since arriving. Ethan handed it over without hesitation. Victoria looked down at the paper, crayon lines uneven but full of intent. It showed the garage, a small figure standing beside it, and another smaller figure holding his hand, above them a bright sun drawn larger than the building itself. In the corner, written in careful, uneven letters, was a single word, "Home." Victoria's breath slowed just slightly as she took it in. The room seemed to hold its silence around her, not demanding anything, just waiting. She lowered the drawing slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper for a brief second. Then she looked back at Ethan, and this time there was no distance left in her gaze, only clarity forming where certainty once lived. "You said you do not measure things the same way I do," she said, her voice steady but changed. Ethan nodded once. "That is right," he replied. Victoria looked at the contract on the bench, then at the envelope, then back at him, and for the first time since she stepped through the door, she did not reach for control, she reached for understanding, and in that quiet shift, the weight of the debt she came to collect no longer felt like a number, it felt like a question she had not yet answered. Victoria stood there a moment longer, the child's drawing still in her hand, her thumb resting gently over the word written in uneven crayon, "Home," and for the first time in years that word did not feel like a concept or an asset class or a line item in a report. It felt personal, something fragile and real, something that could not be measured or transferred. She looked up slowly, her voice quieter now. "How long have you been here?" Ethan followed her gaze around the garage, taking in the worn beams, the patched roof, the workbench marked by years of steady hands. "Almost 13 years, he said. "Started with one toolbox and a promise to my daughter that we would be okay." Victoria nodded faintly, her mind connecting numbers and timelines without trying. 12 years ago, the payment, the collapse that never happened, the rise that followed. She glanced back at him. "So while everything was growing for me," she said, "everything stayed the same for you?" Ethan gave a small shake of his head. "Not the same," he replied. "Just enough." The word lingered between them, simple but heavy with meaning. Victoria lowered the drawing and placed it carefully beside the contract, aligning it as if it belonged there, though it clearly did not, at least not in any legal sense. "Do you know what this place is worth now?" she asked, not as a threat but as a fact. Ethan nodded once. "More than I can pay," he said. Victoria studied him for a moment, searching for regret, for frustration, for anything that would make this easier to categorize, but there was none, only quiet acceptance. "And you are not angry," she said, almost to herself. Ethan met her eyes, steady, grounded. "Anger does not change outcomes," he replied. "It just makes them louder." That landed in a way she did not expect, not sharp, not defensive, just true. From behind them, Lily stepped a little closer, her small hand resting lightly against her father's side. "Daddy fixes things," she said again, softly but with certainty. "Even when people say they cannot be fixed." Victoria looked down at her, really seeing her now, not as part of the situation but as part of the truth. "And who fixes things for him?" she asked gently, the question slipping out before she could filter it. Lily looked up at Ethan, then back at Victoria. "He does," she answered, as if there was no other possibility. The simplicity of it settled into the room, quiet and undeniable. Victoria exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, the weight she carried no longer sitting where it used to. She turned back to the workbench, her eyes moving between the contract, the envelope, and the drawing. 3 versions of value sitting side by side, numbers, history, and meaning. She reached for the contract, lifting it just enough to feel its weight, then paused, her fingers still against the paper. "If I walk away from this," she said carefully, "I am not just changing one outcome. I am rewriting a decision that has already been approved, reviewed, and expected." Ethan did not move, did not interrupt, he simply listened. "There are boards, investors, people who rely on consistency," she continued, her voice steady but no longer detached. "They do not see what I see right now." Ethan nodded once. "That is usually how it works," he said. Victoria looked at him again, something deeper forming behind her eyes, not doubt, not confusion, but a choice beginning to take shape. "And yet," she said slowly, "they also do not know what I know now." The room seemed to hold its breath, not in tension, but in anticipation of something unspoken, something that had not yet been decided but was already changing direction. Victoria set the contract back down gently, not final, not resolved, just paused, and in that quiet pause, the balance of power that had walked into the garage with her no longer belonged to her alone. Victoria did not reach for the contract again, and that in itself was a decision, even if she had not said it out loud yet. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the workbench, her fingers no longer tense, just present, as if she was grounding herself in something real instead of something calculated. "If I change this," she said slowly, her eyes still on the papers, "it does not just disappear, it creates questions." Ethan nodded once. "Everything does," he replied, his tone steady. Unbothered by outcomes he could not control, Victoria let out a quiet breath, her gaze lifting toward him again. "They will ask why," she continued. "They will want justification, documentation, logic that fits inside a report." She paused, then added, almost to herself, "They will not accept a feeling." Ethan's expression remained calm, unchanged. "Then do not give them a feeling," he said. "Give them the truth." The simplicity of it caught her off guard, not because it was complicated, but because it was not. Victoria studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing whether something so simple could actually hold. "The truth is not always enough," she said. Ethan gave the faintest shake of his head. "It is," he replied. "It is just not always convenient." The words settled into her, not forcefully, but with a quiet persistence that did not ask for agreement, only consideration. Behind them, Lily shifted slightly, her small hand still resting against her father, her presence steady, unafraid. Victoria glanced down at her again, then back at Ethan. "You never expected anything in return," she said, not as a question, but as a realization taking shape. Ethan answered without hesitation. "No." A pause, then softer. "That is why it mattered." Victoria looked away briefly, her thoughts moving quickly now, connecting decisions, consequences, expectations, and something deeper that had not been part of her calculations before. She straightened slightly, not in authority, but in resolve beginning to form. "If I walk out of here and cancel this," she said, "it will be seen as inconsistency." Ethan did not respond, he simply listened. "But if I walk out and redefine it," she continued, her voice gaining clarity, "then it becomes strategy." That shift, subtle but significant, changed the Weight of the moment not as avoidance but as alignment between truth and structure. She reached for the contract again, this time with intention, opening it slowly, her eyes scanning the lines not as fixed instructions, but as something that could be rewritten. This property, she said, is listed under recovery and liquidation. She looked up at him. But it can be reassigned under community investment and preservation. Ethan watched her, not surprised, not relieved, just present. Meaning? He said quietly. Victoria closed the folder halfway, holding it in place. Meaning it is no longer something we take, she replied. It becomes something we protect. The words did not rise, they settled. Steady and deliberate, Lily looked up at her father, then at Victoria, as if sensing the shift even without understanding the language behind it. Ethan's expression softened slightly, not with triumph but with recognition. That sounds like a better use of it, he said. Victoria gave a small nod, her decision no longer forming but made. It also means accountability, she added. I will have to stand in front of people who expect numbers and give them something else. Ethan met her gaze. Steady as ever. Then stand, he said simply, and tell them why it matters. The garage fell into a quiet stillness again. But this time it was different, not heavy, not uncertain, but clear, like the air after something has shifted into place. Victoria looked down at the contract one last time, then slowly closed it, her hand resting on top of it as if sealing the decision without needing to say it out loud. And in that moment, the debt she came to collect no longer existed in the way it once had, because it had already begun to transform into something neither of them had expected. But both of them understood. Victoria did not move immediately after closing the folder, and that pause was no longer hesitation. It was the weight of a decision settling into place. She lifted her gaze slowly, looking at Ethan not as someone beneath her authority, but as someone who had quietly shaped a part of her world without ever stepping into it. This does not end here, she said, her voice calm but carrying a new kind of clarity. Ethan nodded once. It never does, he replied. Victoria stepped away from the workbench, her heels softer now against the concrete, not because the surface had changed, but because she had. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, pausing for a brief second before dialing. The call connected quickly. This is Hale, she said, her tone composed but different, less distant, more deliberate. I need the file on the Cole property reclassified immediately. A voice responded on the other end, faint but structured. She listened, then continued. No, not delayed. Reclassified. A pause, her eyes flicking briefly toward Ethan and Lily. Move it under community preservation initiative, effective today. Another pause, longer this time, her expression steady as she absorbed the pushback. Then document it, she said, her voice firm but not raised. Because this is not a loss, it is a correction. She ended the call without waiting for further resistance, lowering the phone slowly. The silence that followed was not uncertain, it was resolved. Lily looked up at her father, then back at Victoria. Are we staying? She asked softly. Ethan glanced at Victoria, giving her the space to answer. Victoria met the child's gaze, and for a moment, all the language of business and structure fell away, leaving only something simple and honest. Yes, she said. You are staying. The word settled into the room like something that belonged there all along. Lily's shoulders relaxed, just slightly, her small hand tightening around her father's sleeve. Ethan did not speak right away. He simply watched Victoria, not with surprise, not with relief, but with quiet acknowledgement. That will not be an easy conversation for you, he said. Victoria gave a faint, almost knowing nod. No, she replied. But easy was never the point. She stepped closer again, placing the contract back onto the bench, but this time it no longer carried authority, it carried history, something that had been rewritten. There will be follow-ups, she continued. Audits, reviews, questions. Ethan shrugged lightly. There always are, he said. Victoria's lips curved just slightly, not a smile of victory but one of recognition. Then I suppose we will both be answering them, she said, the words carrying a subtle shift, no longer divided roles but shared consequence. The garage seemed quieter now, not because the sounds had stopped, but because the tension had, the hum of the lights, the distant wind, the soft movement of Lily beside her father, all of it settling into a new balance. Victoria looked once more at the drawing on the table, her fingers brushing lightly over the crayon. Son, you called this place enough? She said, glancing back at Ethan. It is more than that. Ethan looked around, then down at his daughter, then back at her. It always was, he replied, simple, steady, complete. Victoria held his gaze for a moment longer. then gave a small nod, as if something unspoken had been understood between them, and as she turned toward the door, the sound of her heels returned, but it no longer carried the same weight it had when she arrived, because this time she was not walking in to take something, she was walking out having returned it. The door did not slam when Victoria stepped outside. It closed with the same quiet precision she had carried in, but the silence she left behind was different. It was no longer heavy with pressure, it was full, settled, like something that had finally found its place. Ethan stood where he had been the entire time, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the workbench, his posture unchanged, but something in the air around him had shifted, not victory, not relief, just a quiet continuation of who he had always been. Lily looked up at him, her eyes brighter now. "She is not taking it," she said, as if confirming something she had already decided to believe. Ethan glanced down at her, a small warm smile touching his expression. "No," he said gently, "she is not." Lily nodded once, satisfied, then reached for the drawing on the table, holding it close like it belonged exactly where it was. Outside, the sound of a car engine started, low and smooth, then faded as it pulled away down the road. Victoria did not look back, not because she did not care, but because she no longer needed to. The decision had already been made where it mattered. Inside the garage, Ethan reached for the envelope again, the old paper still carrying the weight of a moment long past. He slid it back into the drawer, not as something hidden, but as something complete. Lily watched him, curious. "Why did you keep that?" she asked. Ethan paused for a second, then closed the drawer gently. "To remember that small things can change big things," he said. Lily considered that, then nodded slowly, as if it made sense in a way she could not fully explain yet. The fluorescent light above them buzzed softly, steady now, no longer flickering. The space felt the same, but it was not really, because what had walked in as a debt had left as something else entirely, something quieter, something that did not need to be written down to be real. Hours later, the garage returned to its rhythm. A truck pulled in, a customer stepped out, uncertain, holding a problem they did not know how to fix. Ethan wiped his hands on a cloth and walked forward, calm, present, ready. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, the same way he always did. The man hesitated, then explained, his voice unsure. Ethan listened, nodding once, then gestured toward the open bay. "We will take a look," he said, no mention of cost, no calculation visible, just the quiet offering of help. Lily sat nearby, her drawing resting beside her, the crayon sun bright against the worn wood. Outside, the road stretched on like it always had, cars passing, people moving, lives continuing, and somewhere beyond that road, in offices filled with glass and numbers and expectations, Victoria stood in front of people who measured everything. Her voice steady as she explained a decision that did not fit neatly into their models. She did not raise her voice, she did not defend herself with force, she simply told them the truth, and when she finished, the room did not argue, it did not interrupt, it did not challenge, it fell into a silence that no one had prepared for, because sometimes the strongest answer was not louder, it was clearer. And back in the small garage that had almost been taken, nothing looked extraordinary, nothing appeared changed, but everything was, because dignity had not asked to be seen, and still it had been recognized, not with applause, not with celebration, but with something far more lasting, a quiet understanding that what truly matters does not disappear, it waits, and when the moment is right, it returns, not as noise but as silence that says everything. In this emotional journey, a powerful female CEO arrives to collect a debt from a struggling single dad, only to uncover a truth that changes everything. What begins as a cold business decision transforms into one of the most touching stories about dignity, quiet strength, and second chances. Through subtle moments and moral tension, the single father reveals a past act of kindness that once saved an entire company, creating one of those rare touching stories where compassion outweighs power. As the female executive confronts her own values, the story unfolds into deeply human territory, making it one of the most unforgettable, touching stories of redemption and respect. Guided by the innocence of a child and the quiet resilience of a father, this narrative stands among touching stories that remind us true worth cannot be measured by money. Ultimately, this is one of those touching stories that leaves a lasting silence, where the strongest voice is not spoken but felt. If you think this story is over, it's not. Subscribe. There's more to come.